throughout all of history, there is one name that rises above all the others, possibly, as the most depraved, heinous, vile human being ever to have walked the planet. Humans worldwide almost unanimously agree, some from the start, but most in hindsight, that this man was pure evil. Yes, I'm talking, of course, about the infamous dictator Adolf Hitler. BBC writes, quote, "Few names from history inspire such immediate and emphatic revulsion as that of Nazi leader Adolf Hitler. His hands are stained with the blood of millions killed in the devastation of the Second World War and the horror of the Holocaust. But Hitler was not born a brutal tyrant. He became one." End quote. He became one. Well, that begs the question, of course, how did he become one? How does a normal Austrian boy born to a family of modest means come to take over another country's government so fully that he acquires the power to engage the entire world in a bloody war while simultaneously murdering millions of innocent men, women, and children? Oh, what, you thought Hitler was German? Turns out there's a lot the masses don't know about Adolf Hitler and his rise to power. And as we well know, to forget history is to risk repeating it. Let's fix that. Hello, I'm Shayla Fontaine, and you're listening to History Fix, where I discuss lesser-known true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. I've been hearing a lot of mention of Adolf Hitler lately. You know, with the recent changes to the U.S. government, there's been a lot of talk about fascism and oligarchies and threats to democracy. And yes, Hitler was fascist and he was propped up by oligarchs. And yes, he did completely dismantle democracy in Germany in around 53 days. So I think all the Hitler chatter is warranted. But I also think that the situation right now is very different from the situation back then. And it's possible that all this Hitler talk just adds to the fear and the panic and the division. And I'm just going to say it. I don't think many people know the first thing about Adolf Hitler. Not really. I mean, I think everyone knows he was a monster, and he was a monster, but the details matter. And if we're going to learn from the past to avoid another Hitler situation going forward, those details certainly matter. So what was the situation then? Let's dive into the life of Adolf Hitler, my friends, to try to get to the bottom of how a true monster is made. And just heads up, this is going to be a two-parter. So get ready to tune back in next week for the conclusion of this story. It's worth it. Trust me, you need to know about this. Neglecting to learn and remember this history comes with some very serious possible consequences. So Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in the small Austrian town of Braunau am Inn. Gonna butcher a lot of pronunciation this week. Forgive me. So this town is in Austria, but it's very close to the Austrian border with Germany. So Hitler was Austrian, but he was kind of like a wannabe German, you'll see. His father, Alois, was a state customs official, right? He worked for the government. He was like a civil servant, which Hitler thought was very uncool. And his mother, Clara, had come from a poor peasant family. BBC writes, quote, "Life was financially comfortable for the Hitler family. But Alois was a domineering character, and young Adolf frequently found himself on the wrong side of his father's short temper. At primary school, Hitler was a clever, popular child. At secondary school, he withdrew psychologically, preferring to reenact battles from the Boer War than study. He left school with no qualifications at 16, end quote. So he was a high school dropout with daddy issues, essentially, and also had a somewhat off-putting interest in warfare at a young age. Now, I don't think he was, abused. There's certainly no evidence that he was, overtly abused by his father. I know that's a common thread that a lot of other narcissistic psychopaths share, like serial killers. If you look at their upbringing, they have all this abuse in the home. They tend to have, this really rough home life. It seems like Hitler's home wasn't always the most peaceful place. He seemed to have butted heads with his father. But there doesn't seem to have been like actual physical abuse going on. I don't know, possibly psychological, emotional abuse. Just of note. Somewhat surprisingly, Hitler wanted to be an artist. I know, I wouldn't peg him for the artsy type, but he wanted to be an artist. Now, his father did not support that dream. He wanted Hitler to follow him into civil service. But as I already said, Hitler found that very uncool. Alois died in 1903, and Hitler was like, cool, now I can follow my dreams. And he applied for art school in Vienna in 1907. However, the art school, the Vienna Academy of Fine Arts, promptly denied his application. He did not get in. The next year, 1908, his mother died. Okay, so just quick recap here. Hitler is a 19-year-old high school dropout. Both of his parents have recently died, and he didn't get into art school. So, things are not great. He's still determined to be an artist, though, so he moved to Vienna anyway, and he started painting and drawing buildings and monuments and scenes of Vienna and selling these as postcards, scraping by that way. And honestly, they're pretty good. I hate to say that. I hate to compliment the man, but he wasn't a terrible artist. But, it's not working out for him. He's selling postcards on the streets of Vienna, and it's just not sustainable. These aren't the dreams he had in mind of becoming some famous artist. Now, while he's in Vienna, according to BBC, he's heavily influenced by the anti-Semitic politics of Vienna's mayor, Karl Lueger. And he starts to really come to hate what BBC calls the, quote, multi-ethnic composition of Austria's ruling Habsburg Empire, end quote. I know I've talked about the Habsburg family before. I've got it on my list of topic ideas, so it's coming someday soon. But they ruled over a lot of Europe for a really long time. And they were white, okay? The Habsburgs were Austro-German. They were like super white, and they were super inbred in order to keep it that way. But they ruled over this large area, and so their empire included people and influences, cultures from, for example, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Romania, Croatia, Italy, etc. And many of these people in these areas were Jewish. And Hitler is not digging all this diversity. So he actually moves to Munich in 1930. Munich is in Germany. It was in the German state of Bavaria. And, I told you he was kind of a wannabe German. He's like, Austria is so uncool with their multi-ethnic Habsburg empire. A white guy like me should really be living in Germany. And so he moves to Germany. Now, a year after Hitler moved to Germany, World War I broke out. And he wanted to prove his worth to Germany, his wannabe country. He's not a German citizen, so he can't actually enlist in the military. So instead, he just volunteers. He volunteers to serve in the German army. He served throughout the war in both France and Belgium, and he won 2 decorations for bravery, including the Iron Cross First Class, which is apparently quite rare. According to History.com, he wore that medal for the rest of his life. So clearly, this time at war, fighting during World War I, meant a lot to him. BBC writes, quote, in the army, he finally found purpose, a cause with which he could wholly identify, end quote. Which, what even was the cause of World War I? Great question. Very complicated and seemingly nonsensical answer, but whatever. Hitler wholly identified with it. And he's like, yeah, go war, go Germany. Doesn't even know why he's fighting, I'm sure, for a country he isn't even a citizen of, but he's all for it. He was injured twice during the war. He was hit in the leg in 1916, recovered, gets back out there, and then in 1918, he was nearly blinded by a British gas attack. And it was while he was still recovering from this second injury, he's laid up, recuperating in a hospital, and he gets word that Germany had surrendered and the war was over. They lost. And he was shocked and devastated by this. Yes, devastated that one of the bloodiest wars in history had come to an end. This war had given him purpose. He was all for it. He was good at it. And now they were taking it away from him. It had to have been like art school rejection all over again. So he's mad. How dare they surrender? And he's looking for someone to blame. But he doesn't blame the Allied powers. He doesn't blame their enemies in the war, France, Great Britain, Russia, Italy, Japan, and the United States. He doesn't blame the victors. He blames who he sees as traitors within Germany. those at home who had undermined the war efforts and sabotaged their victory. BBC writes, quote, "Before the surrender, facing serious discontent at home and the prospect of defeat at the front, Germany's high command sought to shift the blame. The majority parties in the Reichstag were handed a poisoned chalice. They were given more power, but implicated in the impending defeat. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicated days before armistice. Like others, Hitler was enraged by what he saw as the betrayal of an undefeated German army by Jews and socialists at home. He resolved to go into politics," end quote. And I read that probably like 5 times before I could make much sense of it. What they're saying is the powers that be in Germany were like, okay, this isn't going well. We're losing this war. I don't want to get blamed for it. Let's let the Reichstag, which is parliament, let's let them make the call, and then it'll all be their fault instead of ours. And so all the blame gets put on the Reichstag, on parliament, which Hitler and others come to see as fundamentally flawed. Too many Jews, really, in Hitler's mind. And things certainly don't improve after that. The blame game heats up to a fever pitch as Germany's economy tanks following the end of the war. I talked about this a little bit in episode 54 about the women of the SEO, but things got really, really bad in Germany after World War I. They basically got blamed for the whole war in the Treaty of Versailles, and the terms were not in their favor, to say the least. According to the National World War II Museum, quote, "Hitler and other patriotic Germans were outraged and humiliated by the harsh terms of the Treaty of Versailles, which the Allies compelled the new German government, the Weimar Republic, to accept, along with an obligation to pay $33 billion in war reparations. Germany also had to give up its prized overseas colonies and surrender valued parcels of home territory to France and Poland. The German army was radically downsized and the nation forbidden to have submarines or an air force," end quote. They go on, quote, "Paying the crushing reparations destabilized the economy, producing ruinous runaway inflation. By September 1923, 4 billion German marks had the equal value of $1 American. Consumers needed a wheelbarrow to carry enough paper money to buy a loaf of bread," end quote. And whose fault is this? In Hitler's mind, of course, it's these traitors right here in Germany. How dare they surrender and make fools out of us in front of the entire world, ruin our economy. And so his anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish, anti-non-Aryan views start to strengthen. They are what is wrong with Germany. They caused all of this. And that really is the hallmark of a narcissist, isn't it? It's always someone else's fault. And that blame becomes justification to abuse that person. BBC reports, quote, "Still in the army, Hitler was sent to report on an emerging far-right group, the German Workers' Party, later renamed the Nazi Party. Finding he agreed with their nationalist, anti-Semitic beliefs, he joined," end quote. So I didn't realize that. I always kind of thought Hitler started the Nazi Party. He actually sort of stumbled upon it, but then he did help shape and mold it into what it would later become. The full name of the party, this political party, was the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Nazi is just a shortened version of the first bit, National Socialist. In German, socialist is spelled with a Z, so it's like the first 2 letters of national and like the middle 2 letters of socialist. Anyway, Hitler stumbles upon this group, and he's like, hey, they love Germany and hate Jewish people too, and he joins the party. He starts giving speeches in front of party supporters, and he's such a charismatic speaker, he's such a good orator, that he quickly rises through the ranks of the Nazi Party in like true cult leader fashion. And these are big speeches. This isn't just like some guys in a pub. He's speaking in front of crowds of up to 6,000 people, these huge rallies. By 1920, he had left the German army and assumed control of propaganda for the Nazi Party. They're like, this guy's good at brainwashing. Let's put him on propaganda. And it was during this time, while Hitler was heading the propaganda department, that he suggested the Nazi Party adopt the swastika as its symbol. Swastikas were already a thing. Long before Nazis, they are an ancient sacred symbol used in Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, these super peaceful, pacifist religions. So this is a symbol with a very positive connotation. In Hinduism, for example, it means good luck. So you can see how making this the symbol of the Nazi Party, it helps people to view it more favorably. It's propaganda. It's like making your symbol a thumbs up, right? Oh, wait, that's Facebook. History.com says, quote, printed in a white circle on a red background, Hitler's swastika would take on terrifying symbolic power in the years to come. By the end of 1921, Hitler had become leader of the growing Nazi Party, capitalizing on widespread discontent with the Weimar Republic and the punishing terms of the Versailles Treaty. Many dissatisfied former army officers in Munich would join the Nazis, notably Ernst Röhm, who recruited the strong-arm squads known as the Sturmabteilung SA, which Hitler used to protect party meetings and attack opponents. End quote. So these Sturmabteilung, they wore these brown uniforms, right? Brown pants, brown collared shirt, swastika patch on the upper arm. They were also called stormtroopers, like Star Wars style, the original stormtroopers. Sometimes they were called brown shirts because of the brown shirts. So these guys are the muscle, right? They're Hitler's army in the Nazi Party. So his party is growing. It's still not like a big deal. It's a major minority politically still, but it's gathering supporters using a very specific strategy that we have seen all too recently used in the United States. The Nazi Party flourished by sowing fear and panic in the people, by pointing out how terrible everything was, how bad the economy was, how corrupt and inefficient the government was. Drain the swamp? Those are Hitler's words. Historian Timothy W. Ryback writes for The Atlantic, quote, Hitler had campaigned on the promise of draining the parliamentarian swamp, den parlamentarischen Sumpf, end quote. Yeah, I don't speak German, sorry. But so their strategy was just to point out how bad and messed up everything was. And then once they had everyone thoroughly freaked out, they offered the solution. The National World War II Museum explains that solution, quote, Hitler, a mesmerizing public speaker, addressed political meetings in Munich calling for a new German order to replace what he saw as an incompetent and inefficient democratic regime. In the new Germany, all citizens would unselfishly serve the state, or Volk. Democracy would be abolished and individual rights sacrificed for the good of the Führer's state. The ultimate aim of the Nazi Party was to seize power through Germany's parliamentary system, install Hitler as dictator, and create a community of racially pure Germans loyal to their Führer, who would lead them in a campaign of racial cleansing and world conquest. End quote. Racial cleansing and world conquest. Those were the ultimate goals, though they were sort of veiled at first under this guise of, oh, everything is so terrible, we can fix it. We can fix the economy. Rally behind us, working class. We got you. The National World War II Museum explains the racial cleansing side of things, writing, quote, Hitler blamed the Weimar republics, which remember, that's just Germany at this time, that's what it was called. He blames the Weimar Republic's weaknesses on the influence of Germany's Jewish and communist minorities, who he claimed were trying to take over the country. There are only two possibilities, he told a Munich audience in 1922. Either victory of the Aryan or annihilation of the Aryan and the victory of the Jew. The young Hitler saw history as a process of racial struggle, with the strongest race, the Aryan race, ultimately prevailing by force of arms. Mankind has grown great in eternal war, Hitler wrote. It would decay in eternal peace. Jews represented everything the Nazis found repugnant. Finance capitalism, controlled, the Nazis believed, by powerful Jewish financiers. International communism, Karl Marx was a German Jew, and the leadership of the German Communist Party was heavily Jewish. And modernist cultural movements like psychoanalysis and swing music, end quote. And y'all, when people start blaming musicians, that's a red flag. Remember, that was one of the reasons they banned cannabis, if you listen to that episode. They're like, black people smoke weed, and also their jazz music is evil. Okay, So things are bad, though. They're really, really bad economically. And for a sec, Hitler goes all French Revolution in November of 1923 in an act that will come to be called the Beer Hall Putsch. Putsch is just the German equivalent of coup. He storms into a beer hall. Remember, in France, it was tennis courts. Hitler storms into a beer hall in Munich where the Bavarian prime minister was giving a speech. He storms in wielding a revolver, and he's like, this is it. It's a revolution. We're doing this. And he forces the prime minister to pledge support to the Nazi party at gunpoint. And he riles everybody up and he marches them, some 3,000 people, to the center of Munich to, I suppose, overthrow the government. But the police are waiting for them, and this huge gunfight ensues, and 16 Nazis and 3 police officers are killed, and Hitler is arrested and sentenced to 5 years in prison for treason, which seems like a light sentence, I'm realizing, for treason, especially considering he's not even German. But I mean, if that's not treason, I don't know what is. It feels a little tiny bit January 6th-ish to me. Just saying. But Hitler actually goes to prison for it. Sort of. I mean, he only serves 9 months of this 5-year sentence. But while he's there in prison, he writes his famous book, Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. According to History.com, quote, in it, Hitler expanded on the nationalistic, anti-Semitic views that he had begun to develop in Vienna in his early 20s, and laid out plans for the Germany and the world he sought to create when he came to power. It sold modestly at first, but with Hitler's rise, it became Germany's best-selling book after the Bible. By 1940, it had sold some 6 million copies there, end quote. So let's talk about that rise to power, because by the time Hitler got out of prison, things were not looking good for the Nazis. The beer hall putsch was a disaster, and worse than that, the economy had started to improve. And that was bad for Hitler because, remember, he relied on that fear-mongering, on pointing out the flaws in the old system, on having someone else to blame, on needing to drain the swamp. This was how he gained support. And now that support was turning back towards the Weimar Republic, back toward the people running Germany, because things are going better now, right? It's okay now. So over the next few years, Hitler sort of just lays low. He established the Hitler Youth, which was a way to brainwash kids into becoming Nazis. And he also established the Schutzstaffel, or SS, which would eventually replace the stormtroopers, right? The brown shirts. Kind of sounds like a breakfast food, Schutzstaffel. But no, these are bad guys. These were the enforcers. Also during this time of laying low, Hitler falls in love with an unlikely candidate. His niece. Yes, his niece, the daughter of his half-sister, Angela. Her name was Geli, G-E-L-I. I have no idea if I'm saying that right. It's short for Angela. And she was 23 years old. According to History.com, quote, after Hitler became infatuated with his beautiful blonde niece, Geli Raubal, his possessive jealousy apparently led her to commit suicide in 1931, end quote. And they just leave it at that, but I have so many questions, and this is straight up a whole nother episode. This is a total can of worms. She was found dead in Hitler's apartment of a gunshot wound with Hitler's gun laying nearby. It was a huge scandal that was promptly covered up to protect Hitler's political career. But of course, there are questions about whether it was actually a suicide or a homicide. It doesn't look good either way. He fell in love with his niece, who wound up dead in his apartment with his gun under suspicious circumstances. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, but we may have a bit of a like father, like son thing going on here. There is some question about who Hitler's biological grandfather was, his father's father. And a lot of experts believe that Hitler's mother, Clara, was actually his father's half-niece as well. Either that or his cousin once removed, depending on who his father actually was. But yeah, Hitler's parents were most likely closely related. So the niece infatuation thing seems to be genetic. I don't know. Serious minifix potential here. Anyway, he appears, at least, to be absolutely devastated by her death. But he soon begins a new love affair with a shop assistant named Eva Braun, whom he refused to marry. So weird, kind of like a weird, twisted love life thing going on, clinging to the straws of the floundering Nazi party as Germany's economy started to bounce back. But then, in 1929, the U.S. stock market crashed, ushering in the Great Depression. And this affected the whole rest of the world too, including Germany. A lot of those financial, economic problems they had been having since the end of World War I returned. And the Nazis, Hitler, once again had his fodder for fear-mongering. The Nazi party starts gaining support again. Hitler wants to run for office, right? This is all part of the plan. He's supposed to take office and eventually become the dictator, the supreme ruler of this new Germany they promised. But remember, Hitler is not actually a German citizen. He had given up his Austrian citizenship back in 1925 so as not to be extradited back to Austria, but he was not a German citizen, and so he couldn't actually run for office. And actually, applying for German citizenship was complicated quite a bit by the fact that he had been convicted of treason not long ago. So to get around this little snafu, the Nazi party appointed him to a government position that he was allowed to have that came with German citizenship. It was like a package deal. So bit of a loophole there. In 1932, Hitler, now German, ran for office to become president of the Weimar Republic of Germany. Just became German, like yesterday. He's going after the presidency. But he ran against a wildly popular, though very old, he was in his 80s, war hero named Paul von Hindenburg, who had already been serving as president since 1925. Now, Hitler lost the election spectacularly with only 36.8% of the vote. He lost hard. Ryback writes, quote, Hitler had his chief legal counsel, Hans Frank, go to court to have the election results overturned, claiming that there had been irregularities by state officials and that Hitler had been unfairly disadvantaged by not being permitted to speak on the radio. The presiding judge chided Frank for wasting the court's time and dismissed the case, observing that 6 million votes was too large a margin for any of Hitler's claims to have made a difference, end quote. It is rumored that Hitler actually contemplated suicide after this defeat. That's how crushing it was. His delusions of grandeur had been shattered once again. But not for long. Hindenburg becomes president. The country is in terrible shape. The government is in chaos. He goes through 3 different chancellors who all completely blow it before finally, unbelievably, appointing Hitler as chancellor. So, some things to unpack there. Germany has a president and a chancellor. The president is the head of state, but he's a little bit more symbolic. He doesn't have a ton of power. I mean, he sort of does because he can actually dismiss his cabinet and the chancellor. He reserves the right to fire them. The chancellor is more like the acting head of government because he gets to pick the cabinet members and whatnot. He's more like a prime minister. He's sort of calling the shots. And so Hindenburg hands Hitler this super powerful position of chancellor. So why did he do that? Hindenburg notoriously hated Hitler. According to Ryback, quote, his disdain for Hitler was common knowledge. The previous August, he had declared publicly that, quote, for the sake of God, my conscience, and the country, he would never appoint Hitler as chancellor. Privately, Hindenburg had quipped that if he were to appoint Hitler to any position, it would be as postmaster general, quote, so he can lick me from behind on my stamps. In January, Hindenburg finally agreed to appoint Hitler, but with great reluctance and on the condition that he never be left alone in a room with his new chancellor, end quote. So that doesn't really explain why. BBC suggests, quote, they believed they could control Hitler and get him to do what they wanted, end quote. They also seem to think it would keep communists from gaining power. Hitler was better than communism. I don't know. So for whatever reason, they've given Hitler the keys to the castle. And I have to assume that his cult leader sort of tendencies must have helped with this, his way of captivating large audiences, of gaining support from the masses, all the propaganda work he'd done, all the brainwashing. And things were bad. Remember, they were really bad and people were desperate. And here was this guy professing that he could fix all their problems. And here's Hindenburg struggling tremendously in his mid-80s to run this floundering country, appointing 3 previous chancellors who had failed already, and who was left? Hitler, the guy whose name everyone seems to be chanting. Why not give him a shot? This is a democracy, after all. There are checks and balances. He doesn't have that much control. He can't just do whatever he wants, not in a democracy. And so Hitler becomes chancellor. But democracy proves a weak shield against Hitler and the Nazi Party's plans for total control of the country and ultimately the world. And it is game on now. They don't need a coup, a putsch to make this happen. They plan to destroy democracy using democracy. If they play their cards right, Hitler will become supreme, unchecked leader of Germany without actually breaking any laws or defying the Constitution at all. But to set this in motion, they need a spark. And that spark is a literal spark. Tune in next week to learn how a suspicious fire at a government building in Berlin transforms an unlikely underdog into a supreme leader who will unleash unfathomable atrocities upon our world. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I hope you found this story interesting, and maybe you even learned something new. Be sure to tune in next Sunday for part 2 of this story. You are not going to want to miss it. Also, be sure to follow my Instagram at HistoryFixPodcast to see some images that go along with this episode and to stay on top of new episodes as they drop. I'd also really appreciate it if you would rate and follow History Fix on whatever app you're using to listen, and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about it. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix. Information used in this episode was sourced from The Atlantic, the National World War II Museum, History.com, BBC, Time Magazine, The Conversation, History Extra, The Globalist, Vanity Fair, the Jewish Virtual Library, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Holocaust Encyclopedia, Smithsonian Magazine, and Wikipedia. Man, I read a lot of articles for y'all this week. As always, links to these sources can be found in the show notes.